Welcome back to the Titanium Hangar. This is Mike, and today I want to talk to you about figure breakage and which figures break, what's the most common ones. First off, I want to say thanks to everybody who responded to my poll and let me know what figures of theirs that they have issues with and what break. Then I'm going to talk about like my top figures that I'm seeing that are breaking. I'm going to let you know what companies were predominantly involved and why, which companies really haven't hit the list, and ways to fix them coming up. So the first figure I'm going to put on this list and I'm going to talk about is the Omnicon Spinout, and he's the first one because he's outdated. I know people don't really care about this figure anymore, and I want to bring to the point the fact that this figure was actually a really good figure in design and a poor figure in production, and the fact that the designer had no control of production or any influence whatsoever, that it just really didn't meet the QC standards and had QC standards of wheels falling off and parts just coming apart. But the reality of it is that I don't know if the plastic was bad or what, but I know that this figure had a lot of problems, so it's the top of the list. Next one I want to throw out there is the XTrans Bots II. Now, I think they're great, and I haven't had any of mine break yet. But I have to say, the gun on my drag strip is broken. I glued it back, fixed it. It's not a big deal, but yeah, I could see the little piddly things that are wrong with them. But I could also see how people could easily break these figures. I see like cracking and chipping on some other people that have broken their figures, and I've had a lot of reports of it. And even Crack Up, which I think is a really solid figure, the first one they put out, I hear that one breaking too. So all these figures, if you don't handle them right, they are going to break, and some of them, there's really no way around breaking them. I will show you a video how to take them from car mode to bot mode without breaking them. It's quickly and simply, and that's coming up. Okay, now, and I'm sure I've talked about this before, but Fanboys Tesla, now I've got a perfect version of Fanboys Tesla that was very well cared for by the previous owner. I'm the second owner, and he's in great shape. But people started telling me telltale signs of theirs breaking, so I kind of unclipped mine and looked inside the chest and all that stuff. And I'm hearing that here's the three major problems I hear with this. The pelvis breaks somehow, the connector points where the screws screw together. The internally, the inside where the plastic is starts to crack on the inside. So where you would not see it on the outside of the bot, like the chest piece or the arms or the legs, the red parts seem to crack. And it's cracking from the inside, which is interesting. And I've heard of that from several people. And then also the little thin strips of plastic on the back that hold the cannon on, I hear about that breaking and cracking. So definitely things you need to watch out for, and be careful with those parts as you manipulate this figure. And a lot of people say that it's just bad plastic on this batch. So XTRans Bots Apollon, again, I have this figure. He's not broken, whatever, but I picked the second one up in a lot, and it was broken, and of course I fixed it. I used a glue that almost makes it better than new when it comes to metal on metal, and thank goodness it was a metal piece broken. But anyway, it's still scary to transform this guy, and there are so many parts and pieces that feel like you will break it if you transform it. And then of course once you've transformed it, it doesn't want to hold back together in bot mode. But I still think he's an ominous, menacing looking Megatron, and I think that he looks great on a shelf today. Parts that break are the hips, that back barrel piece, and the arms. They where they peg in, they don't break so much as they're just too loose. And then the lower legs, all the piece on the inside, all those little flaps and pieces easily break off. Now this is probably one of the saddest events, and it is the Beast Wars Megatron. Now real quick, I know the majority of my viewers don't care about Beast Wars, and that's fine. And I didn't myself when I set out on this whole journey here, but the reality of it is they look so good, and aside from like this guy and Dinobot, the officials are reasonably priced. They match the cartoon, just makes people want to jump on them in droves. But here is the problem: the pelvis cracks on this guy, and pretty much everything that is purple on this guy has a tendency to crack the same way the pelvis did. And so there are multiple reports of all different areas of this, but the pelvis cracking on about 70% of what I'm hearing. That number might be way higher, way lower or higher than reality. But anyway, be careful with this guy. Be careful with your transformation of him. And then the KO comes out. I would really be interested to see if the KO fixed that problem. So next up is Fans Toys Rouge. And yes, this figure is delicate. It's funny because they call her Delicate Warrior. One of the other companies that made her, I think it was Impossible Toys, called her Delicate Warrior. And speaking of Impossible Toys, I'm not going back to iGear and Impossible Toys because they are so outdated. We know that it's just, we're in a different world right now than we were back then. So looking at this figure here, the reasons that this figure breaks or people have problems with it is because look how thin of a figure it is. Look how thin of plastic they have to use that has to fold up multiple times to turn into a backpack that turns into the car parts and all of that. So yes, if you are not super gentle with this, then it will break. And that also goes to another point that I personally will never accuse anybody of breaking something and saying that it's not really their fault because of a bad design or a poor design. And I understand there's a debate on that one. Was it good instructions or bad instructions? If you transform these wrong, any one of these Masterpiece Transformers will break. If you follow the instructions step by step and it still breaks, that is a bad thing. Next, we'll talk about XTrans Bots Illegos. They're it's like Kronos, and I know you're digging this render. So it's been around so long, it's hard to believe this thing was just renders at one time. But anyway, this figure here actually has a couple of weak points to it. The reality of it is, overall, it's a pretty solid figure. But there's a lot of small bits and pieces, a couple of pieces that are cover pieces that break off very, very easily. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they broke theirs one way or another. Now, some people broke major parts of this, and others just broke those little pieces that come off. But the fact that you have a lot of little pieces, well, those are opportunities to break it. So be careful when transforming this guy and understand it. Some parts only go one way. Now a little sad part here. MP44 was received with mixed results. Now, first off, I want to say he's an awesome looking Optimus Prime. Second off, I want to say that I haven't broke mine. But guess what? So many other people reported the breakages, and there are people that transform high-end Transformers all the time. In fact, I view them as better at transforming these than me. And they've broken theirs, and they've had to fix theirs. So, to me, this figure actually had some problems. I didn't really want to admit it first because I haven't had a problem with them. And every time I show MP44 in my video, I'm that guy that likes to flirt with danger. I've been that me every time I take them off the shelf to see if it's still working. But the weak points in this guy, his knees. The knees, they have an internal ratchet that is a double ratchet, and the double ratchet breaks. Now, there's the whole controversy whether or not you're doing it right. You know what? You shouldn't have to just bend a knee to a 90 or way past the 90 to... there's not a right or wrong way to do that. But, because I don't really do anything special. I don't follow any special maneuver. There is, if it's tabbed in properly, it'll have the right support, theoretically. Now, the other thing is the fact that there's so many thin parts and you fold up the red cab into his legs. Those are really thin parts and pieces. There's a lot of mechanism going on to create that. And with that, if you are too rough with it, and if it feels like it's not going in right, it's probably not set up right, and you probably will break it. Next up, the MP09 Rodimus. Now, this figure came out and it looks amazing. Just, that is Rodimus, by the way. It's going to be really hard to beat this mold in aesthetic. But to get that close of an aesthetic, it is hard to do it without so many thin pieces. So the same kind of problem we have with MP44, well, we had this with MP09, and MP09 breaks. Now, I had one I bought in a lot of broken Masterpiece Transformers. I bought them to rebuild myself an MP10, back in like 2013 or something like that, because I wanted MP10 and I didn't want to pay 300 bucks. So this guy was involved in that lot, and I couldn't fix it because the part was just missing. But it was at the waist and pretty much broken in half at the waist, and one leg was missing. So when you look at something like this, it's hard to piece back together a figure like that, but it's still possible. But when you transform this guy, so I started transforming him with the broken part and trying to figure out how to fix it and trying to figure out how it even happened in the first place. So it's kind of my super sleuth going on here, and I realized something. I realized that there is a very specific series of steps to transform this guy, and if you don't follow it precisely, it will break. Now, I'm not going to put that on whoever broke it. Like, I'm not going to be like, hey, you suck, you broke your figure. What I am going to say is if the engineering in this figure is so bad that you have to go 57 steps exactly the same way or it will break, that kind of is not a good thing in my mind. So really, I haven't had for fun. I haven't flipped this guy back and forth in forever because, frankly, I just don't want it to break again. And I understand the Hasbro release is actually a little bit better. They made some of the parts a little stronger, and there are upgrade parts and pieces you could get here and there to fix a guy. Last but definitely not least, we have DACA Toys Kronos. Now, I know everyone's going to say, Mike, that's outdated, just like you said about iGear and Impossible Toys. And I say, yeah, I agree. But when you look at Fans Toys Phoenix is the one now, and it's commanding about $300, and people are selling this for like $150 or so. So I really think that this guy for $150, if you don't want to spend $300, would make a decent representation on the shelf. But you have to understand a lot of stuff going into this. This figure had big QC issues in the manufacturing process, and in fact, there are a lot of crazy things with this guy. So let's start with the fact that some of the pieces just don't tab in right. Like the shoulders, you have to tab it in to hold it in. Don't hold in very well. The ratchets in the arms, some ratchets in the shoulders just were never put in. So I don't know how that happened. With the fingers, the pin that went through to pin the fingers missed the holes. That's very, very common. The ankles break just by moving them. I do understand if someone said if you lubricate them, when you move them, it won't break. So that's something there too. And so what it has to do with is poor plastic quality also, thin plastic, and just overall poor QC on the whole figure. Now, I have one, and I can manipulate it any way, shape, form I want. Maybe I'm lucky and I have a good copy. But on the flip side, I'm ultra super duper careful with it. I treat this thing as though if I am rough with it at all, it will break, and so for that, I've kept mine whole. Quickly, I want to talk about 3 companies that didn't show up on this list, and they weren't in my poll. Nobody had mentioned these figures so much. One person did mention MMC. So MMC, DX9, and Unique Toys. Now the MMC that was mentioned was their Trailbreaker. I own the Hoist version, which is pretty much the same figure, which is a little bit of remolding to it, and I can see where that figure would break. It feels so light. It feels lighter than a Chug. It feels lighter than a Siege figure, and so with that, I am very careful with manipulating that figure. But on the flip side, I never really feel like it's actually going to break. I just feel like it's light and has no die cast. And, well, the hands pop off very easily. A lot of parts kind of just pop off easily with that figure. And I don't think that's MMC's greatest work. With DX9, I know a lot of people say a lot of things about DX9. With their Galvatron, I own that figure. I don't have a problem with their Galvatron. Their Tyrant, none of the fingers have popped off. None of the bad things have happened with that, so it didn't make the list either. And then with Unique Toys, and Unique Toys has always made a solid product. And I own several of their figures, and I don't feel like any of them are going to break. And amongst them, this Allen is super solid. So there's a reason that XTrans Bots and Fans Toys show up with so many characters, so many releases that are on this list. I'm going to tell you why real fast. The reason for that is because they put out the most figures, the most releases. Those two are neck and neck and head to head fighting out the figures. And if you count the KFC and what's all with KFC, then you would also count a lot more characters for XTrans Bots if you look at that versus the fans toys. And so with those two, if you put out more figures, you have more opportunity for breakage or problems or QC. And especially if you're putting out a figure and then the next month you're putting out a figure and the next month you're putting out a figure, you know what, over the course of a few years you're going to have so many out there that you have way more than the competition and way more opportunity for breakage. So now I want to get into real quick how to fix these if you have a problem. I have found this Loctite super glue gel control. This is the best thing I have found to use. Now, there may be something better. If there's something better, share it with me. Please let me know. But I've repaired probably about 6 or 7, probably 20 figures. Not just Transformers, of course. We're talking about Star Wars, we're talking about Mask, we're talking about Centurion, we're talking about every single line that's out there that exists. I've dealt with it, and I've used this to fix the majority of it. G.I. Joe stuff. This works, and the gel works because super glue just runs right off. But the gel, you can have a nice little blob on there to push together and to make sure you have a solid control. Now, I let it set for 24 hours, and of course, I'm not a professional repairer, so I'm not Toy Pro or anything, so remember that, this is just kind of like a novice way to do it, but it works for me. And of course, contact your companies specifically. So if you have a broken part and you contact like Fans Toys, there's a chance they could get you the part. If you contact MMC or whatever, but you got to look up their contact information online. You might be able to find it from the person you sold it from. The person you sold it from may actually be able to get you that part also, depending on where you're buying this stuff. That's why it really pays to go to a reputable seller like, hey, maybe Show Z. So anyway, let me know what you think about broken figures, how you've dealt with it, which ones have broken on you, which figures have you been able to repair, what figures do you suggest to stay away from entirely. I know there was another Megatron, a third-party Megatron, that maybe was a little smaller than Masterpiece scale that everybody had problems with, and I don't remember what that one was called. And yeah, I understand that was a rough one, but let me know what you think. Like, subscribe. Tiberium Hanger out.